遅いぞゴミめが。隙が見つからん。
An opening, you say? Saito-san weaved around Kazuma, trying to hit at Kazuma from all angles, but Kazuma parried each strike without exerting any effort. The metallic hiss of their blades clashing stung my ears, and I watched Saito-san struggle to find an opportunity to strike as Kazuma easily neutralized each attack. Our chances for victory dwindled with each moment. I nervously wrapped my fingers around my kodachi. All I'd need is a second. I was under no delusion that I could cause any harm to Kazuma, but if I could successfully distract him, then maybe it would be enough for Saito-san to get the better of him. I took in a deep breath, clenching my fist when...
Oi, Saito. 何やってんだよ。
もしかして長らく巡察に出てねえから忘れちまったのか。
俺たちが戦うとき気をつけなきゃいけねえ決まりがあったろ。それは
絶対に敵と1対1で切り合う。
The Baka Trio is here to save our asses! And I appreciate this. Hakuoki, Harada, Heisuke! Each of them were filthy, covered in thick layers of blood, sweat, and dust. The result, I imagined, of their hard-fought battles.
遅くなっちまって悪かったな。とっとと片付けちまおうぜ。
そんじゃあ行くぞー。
Heisuke leapt from the floor, racing towards Kazuma with the zeal of a wild animal. Before Kazuma had a chance to finish his thought,
こうやってみんなで一緒に戦ってると今日にいた頃を思い出すぜ。
Nagakura darted behind Kazuma and pulled all of his weight into swinging his sword against Kazuma's exposed back.
ザ子供め。
Kazuma turned around to aim a retaliatory swing at Nagakura, but
ザコはどっちだ。今日こそてめえらに引導を渡してやるぜ。
next came Hanada rapidly charging forward with his spear, which was aimed right for Kazuma's heart.
サイト、今だ。無敵の剣の威力見せてくれよ。心得ている。
Saito seized his sword, and he hopped in front of where Kazuma had been standing. Suddenly, all was still. A suffocating tension gripped everyone in the hall. Just then... a flickering sheen followed the path of Saito's polished sword, moving faster than the blink of an eye. By the time I realized what had happened, a gaping wound was cut across Kazuma's abdomen. Saito stood tall, his blade unblemished by Kazuma's blood. He had performed a perfect iai, to the point that his blade had seemed, to everyone, invisible. Was Saito really able to land the perfect strike on Kazuma? For whatever reason, time was moving excruciatingly slow, and a silent tension still permeated the air. And then... a blood-curdling shriek bellowed throughout the hall. Kazuma fell to the ground, still as a rock.
やったか。
Everyone's fatigue was starting to set. Doubly so for Nagakura, who spared no moment, dropping to his knees. Saito, on the other hand, still stood still with his sword, firmly in grasp, and he walked towards Kazuma. Kazuma's body had returned to its original form. As Saito-san sauntered quietly towards the fallen demon, it was Amagiri who reached the body before Saito-san did. Amagiri crouched down, inspecting Kazuma's bloody body to verify whether or not he'd truly been killed. And then Amagiri stood up, and he shook his head silently.
見事な立ち筋でした。成長しましたね、サイト。
Saito-san nodded stoically in return.
君に伝えなければならないことがあります。
伝えなければならないこ
行動はこの地で落ち水の最後の実験を行おうとしていました。羅刹の毒を和らげ、少しでも死期を遅らせられるように。陸奥の清らかな水には落ち水の毒を抑える力があるらしい。君もこの地にとどまれば終焉の時を収めることができるかもしれない。毒をその体から全て抜き去ることはできなくとも。
何でそれが
君が本物の武人だからです。羅刹の毒などで早々と死なせてしまうのはあまりに惜しい。この戦はまだ続きます。この陸奥でもさらに北の地でも多くの人々の血が流されるでしょう。薩摩の人々の中には関ヶ原の遺恨を果たすため、徳川家の復讐のため憎しみに駆られて戦う者も多い。けれどそれでは同じことの繰り返しです。100年後、200年後、この合図が今の薩摩や長州と同じ立場になってしまってはあまりに不毛ではないですか。だから考えてほしいのです。次の争いを埋まるためにはどうすればいいか。同じ地に住む腹からが憎しみ合い、傷つけ合わないためにはどうすればいいか。武士の武という字は矛を止めると書くのですから。
Amagiri's eyes were thin and relaxed, and his lips formed a peaceful smile. Then, without another word, Amagiri left us. After our conversation, each of us scattered throughout the castle's corridors, releasing Aisu's soldiers, who had been captured by the demons before we left at dawn. On our way out, we were welcomed by a serene and clear sky. My skin felt pleasantly cool in the fresh air. Saito-san, are you okay? How are you feeling in the sun?
これくらいならどうということはない。
How about you, Heisuke?
まあ、木陰を選んで歩けばまだ平気かな。
I see.
空が眩しいや。鬼退治も終わって明日からはまた人間相手の戦の始まりか。
俺ちょっと考えちまったよ。次の争いを生まねえためにはどうすればいいのかな。
お前なんかの頭で考えても答えなんて出るわけねえだろ。諦めろ。
なんだよ、俺だって武士なんだから矛を止める方法を考えるのが仕事だろ。
争いを生まねえ方法か。やっぱめちゃくちゃ強くなるしかねえんじゃね。こいつとは争ってもいいことねって向こうが勝手に思ってくれれば誰も喧嘩をふっかけては来ねえだろ。
新八さんはそればっかだな。世の中そう単純にはいかないんだって。
なんだと生意気抜かしてんじゃねえよ、青二歳が。
Nakakura jokingly wrapped an arm around Heisuke's neck, then dug his knuckles into Heisuke's scalp.
ま、何にせよ戦は始まっちまってるんだしな。そういうのはさっさと白黒つけちまってから考えようぜ。
そうだ
そんじゃ俺急いで土方さんの後を追っかけなきゃなんねえからもう行くよ。どこまで走れるかわかんねえけど、ここまで来たらとことん戦ってみる。
おう、気をつけてな。無様な死に方しやがったら後の世まで語り継いでやるから覚悟しとけよ。
Oh God. Take care, Heisuke.
ああ、それじゃ。
Heisuke bowed curtly, then sprinted down the mountain path. His wave and smile sparkled beside the horizon.
そんじゃ俺たちも行くか。次の戦の支度を始めねえとな。
だな。しかし斎藤が土方さんと別行動を取ってるとは思わなかったよな。いつも影みてえにぴったりくっついてたのに。
争ってたもとを分かったわけではない。お互い納得した上でのことだ。
なんだよそりゃ。近藤さんと大喧嘩して新選組を飛び出した俺への嫌味か。
Nagakura chuckled gleefully at Saito-san, taking pleasure in his playful banter with a wide smile.
でもまあよかったじゃねえか。行き場所がねえなんて言ってたが、お前自分の意思で殿様選んだんだろ。
選んだのは殿様だけじゃねえような気もするけどな。
Harada flashed a smug grin at Saito. Smug grin, huh?
どういう意味だそれは。
お、なんだよ斎藤が顔をあからめてやがる。お前実は影武者か何かか。
After becoming flustered by Nagakura's taunt, Saito quietly crept his hand downwards to reach for the sword sitting on his right hip.
だからいちいち手を刀に持ってくなって。お前の場合冗談に見えねえから怖いんだよ。
さて、そんじゃあ名残惜しいけどそろそろ行くことにするか。
だな。争いをなくすにはどうすりゃいいかこれから考えていかなきゃならねえが、とりあえずは今の戦を全力で戦わねえとな。
二人とも元気でな。生き残ったらまた酒でも飲みに行こうぜ。
そうだな。
Please be safe, you guys. Farewell. Eventually, the two of them disappeared in the distance. Just like when we saw them off in Edo, the backs of Nagakura and Harada became smaller, shrinking into the horizon to wherever their path was taking them. Saito, are you okay? Hey, why don't we take a minute to rest here? The sun's out after all.
だが
You've just fought in a battle for your life. For once, take some time to think for yourself.
分かった。そうしよう。
Sato-san found a shady spot underneath a lush tree.
情などというものはとっさの判断を鈍らせるだけのものだと思っていたが、ああしてまた皆と共に戦えるとは思わなかった。
I know. Similar to after the Battle of Toba Fushimi, we were left with the difficult task of bidding our dear friends farewell.
忘れはしない。今日での日々も、そして先ほどの戦いも、月日を経ても鮮やかなままこの胸に刻みつけられるだろうな。
Same here, Saito-san. I'd be lying if I said it didn't sadden me to think that I may never see everyone from the Shinsengumi again, but it was inevitable that all of our paths would diverge someday. What mattered most was that all our futures were determined by our own will. Our only choice was to live honestly and with conviction. There was no chance to look back or falter, or give in to any urge to let ourselves become consumed by our doubts. We must be strong. Final chapter. Saito and I found ourselves in a land to the northeast known as Ezo. Wait, we also ended up in Ezo? Alright. War continued to ravage the lives scattered across the land. The stench of blood was thick in the air. June 18th, 1869. Only when the shogun had offered his terms of unconditional surrender did the bloodshed cease. Once the chaos had subsided, word reached us of Nagakura's return to Edo. Yes, both Nagakura and Saito are survivors. Given his unrelenting dedication to the art of the sword, I wouldn't be surprised to hear if he'd spent every day since arriving in Edo honing his skills. Harada, who had originally traveled besides Nagakura during the war, supposedly left the country, making his way to a faraway place known as Manchuria. This is at least for this route. For some reason, the image of Harada gallivanting on top of a large stallion across the meadow came to mind. God, that is a picturesque image of Harada. Okita, who had been fighting his illness in Edo, never recovered from his disease and passed away. Hijikata, whose travels took him from Sendai to Ezo, fought bravely in resistance to the Imperial Army until his dying breath in battle in Hakodate. Heisuke, I heard, gave his life fighting alongside Hijikata. Heisuke had accomplished what he hoped for. His loyalty to Hijikata-san gave him the opportunity to witness how the myth of the Shinsengumi ended. Soma ended up surrendering himself to the Imperial Army as the last standing chief of the Shinsengumi. As for Nomura, we had discovered that he met his end in the Battle of Miyako Bay. As a punishment for putting up a resistance to the Imperial Army, the Aizu domain had their territories revoked, and they moved to Tonami in the far north. Hey Brain, remember Tonami, you gotta figure out where the fuck that is. Frigid temperatures made Tonami a wasteland. The dry, cracked earth made trees and fauna a rare sight. The Aizu were subject to a plight unlike anything they'd ever seen, left to survive in the harshest of conditions. One day, out of the blue, a message for Saito came from the Aizu. Although it hadn't been the most colorful of proposals, they invited Saito to live with them in amnesty. Saito, of course, accepted. Naturally, it meant that I was moving to Tonami too, alongside Saito-san. After several months, where's Saito? He should have come back inside of our home by now, but he was nowhere to be found. If I remember, he dressed lightly as well. It may be better for me to search for him. I wrapped myself in a thick coat and made my way through a blanket of fresh snow before I found Saito. Hoping he hadn't frozen to death, I hollered out to him. Saito! However, Saito showed no reaction. He continued to stare vacantly into the distance. Was it because I was far away? I raised my knees high as I took steps. Fuck. I raised my knees high as I took large steps through the thick wash of snow, slowly making my way to Saito. Saito, what are you doing here? Look at yourself. You hardly have anything warm on. Saito, however, continued to ignore me. Saito, why won't you answer me? You can hear me, can't you? He was only arm's length away from me, and still he refused to turn around. Saito, what's gotten over you? I stomped around his side to look him in the eye, but he merely averted his gaze. What's going on? After stopping to think for a moment, I finally thought of the reason why he may have been ignoring me. Hajime! There! Can you answer me now? After calling him by his first name, the glimmer of his blue eyes finally came into view.
名前で呼び合おうという約束をすっかり忘れていたようだな。
Well, sorry, force of habit. I've been calling you Saito for so long I couldn't help it. Anyways, what are you doing out here? You must be freezing.
ここで待っていれば、あんたが迎えに来ると思った。
So you were waiting for me? But if you had just come straight home, you would have found me.
無論それは知っているが。
Then why were you waiting for me here? I asked him indigently, but Hajime hadn't answered me. Did you really live home without bringing something warmer to wear again? Your shoulders might be cold as ice.
別に寒くはない。
But the temperature is below freezing. Let's hurry home. We can warm our bodies back up. I beckoned Hajime to come with me back to our house, but he was rooted.
待て。あと少しで見られる。
See it? See what?
すぐにわかる。待っていろ。
What Saito was referring to was completely beyond me, so I stood next to him, shivering in my cloak.
来た。
His head was turned upwards. And then... small white flakes of snow began to flutter down lazily from the sky. Snow. Is this what you wanted to show me, Hajime?
最初に落ちてくる一粒。あんたと共に見たかった。
After another moment, the white flakes began to descend in greater numbers, falling calmly on our heads. It's beautiful. Ever since we had moved to Tonami, snow had become a sight with which we were very familiar. But even so, watching the snowflakes float tenderly from above without a sound was a gorgeous, ephemeral experience, both heavenly and fleeting at once. So mesmerizing, it felt as though time suspended.
あんたならそう言ってくれると思った。
Hajime stared into the sky with me, letting a little murmur slip from out of his lips. Even as we entered a new age known as the Meiji era, it did little to halt the tide of strife still festering about. Over 300 domains were scattered throughout our country, once institutions, now history. With that, Japan as we knew it henceforth was born. Daimyos were stripped of their power and property, which also meant no stipends for mercenaries or ronin. In fact, the government began to implement a kind of conscription service, similar to the West, that encouraged all civilians to serve in one large unified army. Movements to ban the carrying of swords began to gather steam as well, citing the barbarism that had plagued our country for so long. Maybe that time will come soon. A time when the world will no longer need warriors.
たとえ世の中が変わったとしても武士がいなくなることはあるまい。刀を持たなくても武士でいることはできる。己の心を裏切らなければ刀を持たなくとも生まれがどうであってもその人間は武士だ。
After drinking the pure water in Mutsu, and her later move to Tonami, Hajime had no longer been afflicted by the curse of bloodlust. However, after harnessing his fury powers again and again in battle, Hajime's lifespan was shortened. We had no way of knowing how much time he had left. Regardless, it gave us the resolve to take on every challenge life had to offer us with confidence. Our futures were in our hands, and we looked ahead. At last, we could live in peace and harmony. Hajime, let's be together forever. Even when the spring comes and melts the snow, and then the summer afterwards, and then the next winter too. Forever. Hajime's voice trailed off, leaving with the icy wind as the snowfall became heavy on our shoulders. Alright, now we're done.